All right. So, very welcome to this event here, which basically, obviously, is hosted by us at Société. And my name is Andreas Nilsson, and I'm extremely proud to be here to have a chat with you guys and talk to you and meet you. And I think the whole concept of like getting together like this and share knowledge and information is something that we feel is 100% part of our DNA at Société. And actually, the event here tonight is something that is part of our Tribes program, which basically is a platform where every developer, regardless of current assignments, has a place and a time to get together, share information, knowledge, inspire, maybe get inspired, or just have a laugh and a beer. And that's something that I truly enjoy while working at Société, that we get this opportunity to, meet fellow Societarians, or you how you how you pronounce that one, yeah. Tonight we are going to listen a bit about web components, I think, and maybe why it's important to choose a JavaScript framework.
It's not a framework.
I know. I'm just playing with you. Well, welcome to my colleague, Jolle.
Okay. No, that's not it. Please. I know I'm supposed to take front stage here, but I have to say I'm a bit intimidated by it, because I was told before we had this, we had a planning meeting, and I know that. That's very nice. I like that. So now they told me that I needed to dazzle you, and I needed to exceed your expectations. And that got me thinking, how the bummer am I going to do that? Because I've sort of started on a very strong note. There is this presentation on the web where it says that I'm an award-winning senior developer, and it doesn't mention that it's an award in bunny jumping, and I was 9, and the award was for participation. But you really didn't need to know that. But and now we have this here. We're just going to have a message of, here is a guy who knows what he's talking about. I mean, it's kind of implied that this dude, he must have written the actual specification for web components, because otherwise he wouldn't sort of advertise himself in this way. And that's not the case. The real case is that I'm sort of a newbie that I've written one web component, and I'm kind of like, wow, this is amazing. I have to share this with the world. Oh, everybody needs to know about this cool thing that I've never seen before. And when I talk to my colleagues, they're kind of like, wasn't that news 2 years ago? And is this really still a hype? And so, yeah, we'll have to see. So I'm going to start with something that I've actually already stolen from the net, because I couldn't come up with a nice definition myself. So here it is. Web components, I'm going to read out loud. Blocks of code that encapsulate the core structure of HTML elements, including CSS and JavaScript, and enable the code to be used in anywhere in websites and web apps. And just for transparency, here's actually where I stole it from, so you can take a photo of this and go check that it's true. And before I move on here, who here is actually a front-end developer? Please raise your hands. Or maybe I should do it the other way around. Who doesn't write front-end code? No one, right. So who here has written a web component already? Wow. Why are you not holding this presentation? So anyway, you can use a web component. You can create your own. You can take existing and just make them better. the code is there for you to analyze, or you can extend what others have written without actually rewriting their component. You just use it as a base for your own stuff. And then why should you do that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Web components are self-contained. They are very easy to move around. They're very portable in every sense. They are as configurable as you need them to be, or as the writer of the component has allowed them to be. And if it's a good web component, that's probably a lot. They are not dependent on any library or framework. You do not need to use React. You do not need to use Angular, Vue. You can insert your own favorite framework here, and then you can set it aside because you don't need to use it in order to get a web component working. They are, however, usable in most libraries and frameworks. If you have a nice web component and you're forced by a client or circumstances to work in Angular or React, you can take that web component and use it straight off, right into your framework or library. In fact, I would say that Angular, for example, I've tried this in both Angular and React. I get the feeling that the Angular development team, they're sort of, oh wow, web components, nice idea, just bring them on. Dead easy to integrate. Really very easy to get a web component to work in an Angular framework or project. React is kind of like, yeah, well, they don't solve anything that you can't do in React, but if you have to, then yeah, go ahead, use them. That's the kind of feeling I get from how React have chosen to make it possible to integrate into React. Still no problem, but you need a tad bit more code to get it working, unfortunately. Web components will not go away. And if you can say that of any other framework or library, then I'm welcome to take that debate with you. But web components are integrated into the web browser itself. It is a native standard in the browsers that you're using, which means that you can rely on that they will work just the same as any other native feature in the browser. If you want to use an image tag, or if you want to have something bold, you use a strong tag. They've been around forever, and they will be around forever. And the same goes for your web component. If you write it now, you will be able to use it in 10 years if it's well written, without having to update the code because your framework that you based it on is updated and not compatible anymore. I don't know how many times I have rewritten Angular projects because they keep bringing on new versions, and the old stuff is not compatible with the new, and suddenly you can't build in Azure anymore because something's changed and you need to fix it. That will not happen with web components. And also, they're stable. This is not news. The standard for web components was actually defined in 2012. That is 10 years ago. It wasn't implemented into web browsers in 2012. And in fact, I would say it's only the last 2 years that you sort of can rely on that it will work as it's supposed to do in browsers. But we are there now. This is not hype anymore. This is something that you can use right now, straight out of the box, compatible. And then for what? I'm going to do this a bit quick here because this is just boring. I have a final. There it is. Use them for anything. If you today are building something in React, you are already accustomed to the thinking of components. You're doing components in React. You're doing components in Angular. And you can do the same with a web component directly without doing a detour around the framework. So go ahead. I want something here that should be contained in a container, in a component. Then you do it. Done. How easy as pie. So, time for demo and time for a... right. Now the thing is, I don't see what you see. I really don't see what you see. I'm not even supposed to see this. Where's my mouse? There it is. I seem to have pulled the window just right out of existence. Here it is. And I think we should also actually just try to have the console open down here. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I just want to have things ready first. So bear with me for 10 minutes or so while I work this out. There it is. I do like that. And I want to have the console and share, stop sharing screen. Like that. Done with it. Hey, now I see what you see. Excellent. So, okay, this is just a website with no particular aim. Apart from that, I have included my web component here. It's the stuff that's inside the box, including the borders. That's the web component. Impressive, right? No? Well, okay. It's my first try. So what it does is that, yeah, if I click this button, it will start a timer. That's it. And inside the component, it will then start to up the time here. But if you notice down here, you can actually see that it's also broadcasting what it's doing. So it's sending out information that, yeah, I started it, and I started it at this date, and there's no stop value. So this component is talking to the context that it has around it. No problem doing that. And you can also see there's sort of a extra flavor up here. This started to pulse to give us an indication that, yes, this component is working, is doing its stuff. So a web component can do that, no problem. I'm sure you're very impressed. Just to show you that it is very easy to integrate, this here, there's not a lot of difference here, but there is the same, exact same component in Angular. It is the same code, it is the same component, but in an Angular environment. And you can also see that it says something different here. It says click button to start Angular timer. It didn't say that in the other one. And the color of that button is different, just to illustrate that I can configure them differently. Despite it being the exact same code, I can have different configurations depending on the context that I'm using them in. So, and let's see it in React. Oof, what a difference. Another color, and it says React. Amazing, right? So, and of course they work the same. If I click here, you get a broadcast down here saying that I did it. Let me stop it, and that's basically it. That's the first component that we can see. And before I do this, I actually need to go back here and say that I don't want to screen dumping, use a separate. Right. Here we go. Now you're seeing this and I'm seeing this. Here's a kind of, you saw those three implementations of the exact same code. I just want to show you one of the perks of using the native implementation. Here's the Angular distribution. In order to get that functionality of this little component that I could click and the timer started, I need 109K for that one. I need a polyfill of 37K, and I need something else that I don't know what it is. So this is the distribution to do that thing in Angular. Here's the distribution to do it natively. 3K, and this JavaScript file, that's all I need for this to work, is actually not compressed, it is not minified in any way, it is just code as I wrote it. I don't need a build system, I don't need Bubble, Webpack, or anything like that. I can just start using it. Here's the React doing the same thing, but it takes 536K to do it. This grows, expands with a, there's a mathematical term for when it grows like this. What is it? Exponential, right? So the bigger project you build, the bigger difference you will have in this. And I think from a user perspective, this is rather important, because I would much rather be a user that can just download a couple of kilobytes of stuff and get going than have to wait for 4, 5, 6 megabytes of data to be downloaded before I can do anything usable. So, okay, how do you write it? Well, easy or hard is actually a matter of perspective, I would say. Web components is JavaScript, so you write them in JavaScript. And you can see that as difficult, or you can see that as easy. I've sort of, yeah, and you can use the library. And I think I said before that you don't need to use libraries anymore. So am I contradicting myself here? Maybe, but the thing is that you can see this as, I was hoping for that one, thank you. You can see this as easy because if you use a library, you will get an environment that feels more familiar if you're coming, for example, from a React environment. You can use a library. There are, for example, something called lit elements that you can use that gives you a developer experience similar to what React does. And that could be perceived as nice. But for the record, when I used lit element to write that exact component that I had prior here, it wasn't 3K anymore, it was 15K. So when you use a library, you are again building size for your project. So you make the call if you think this is easy or this is easy. Both versions work. Here's code. This is basically the bare things you need in order to get a component up and running. You need some HTML. And how you get that into your component is actually something you can choose between several different methods to get it in. But you need something that has HTML in it. And then you define your component. And there are a couple of things here that are mandatory. One is this, my component. When you create a component, you need to have a name with a dash in it. You can't just write class, whatever, I don't know. You can't just write one single word for it. And that rule is implemented because the browser should always be able to tell the difference between something that is native for the browser and something that you invented and added to it. So that's why you always need the dash in the name. Exactly. Yes, exactly. So differentiate. Don't see that as a hindrance. I'm very glad that you interfered. So please continue to do that. I have noticed that you're nodding. That's comforting. But here's another thing that's sort of required. People from the React world, a web component has to be a class. You cannot write a functional web component. It has to be a class. That's actually something that's been decided by the Web Consortium when they defined the standard for this. They said, yes, it needs to be a class. So if you're not using a class, I saw that you protested, that's because you're using a library that turns it into a class. But the end result has to be a class. And it also has to extend the HTML element. You can't extend other elements in the browser yet. Might come variations of that theme. But a web component extends the HTML element, and that's it. So this is sort of a required part of the component. And then you can, probably should, use a constructor. It is not required, but it's a really good idea. And if you do, you need to use super. And if there's some here who doesn't understand why, that's because what the constructor does is actually replace the constructor that comes in the HTML element. And using super means that super will call the constructor in the HTML element and run that first, and then do the stuff that you want it to do. And what I'm doing here is that I'm doing a shadow, which is creating a shadow node. Is it shadow DOM node? What's the word? I'm lost here. Shadow root, yeah. Well, the shadow root is actually just a conventional name for it. You can call it Donald Duck. But what it does is that it gives you, it creates an instance that you then append the content that you have up here into the component. And if you don't do those stuffs, then your component really isn't much of a use. This component here isn't much of a use anyway because it doesn't do anything, but still. You might have noticed that it says slot up there. I will come into that in one of the later slides. So, and then when you want to use it, this is what you do in your HTML. Here's my component. Starts here, ends here. And here I call the script that will make the browser understand what to do with this. That's it. That's all you need. Fairly simple, if you ask me. So, here is the explanation of the slot part that you saw when I created the component. I had in the markup, I had slot. And this will replace the slot in the component. So this will be brought into the component, which means that I can do whatever I want here. In this case, I'm only doing something that is bold, but this could be a fairly elaborate piece of HTML that goes straight into my component.
So that's basically the equivalent of React children.
Yes. But there are perks, which I'm sure we have in React as well. We can see a bit of them here. Well, this is just, no, here's actually some part of that. Here's a really simple, this doesn't add anything apart from what you add, send into the component. This one here, I'm probably going to do like that, so it's highlighted now that I've done this nice piece in my presentation. But here is something a bit more elaborate, because here you see, no, you don't. I don't know why I have that here. It's just probably to show that you can have more stuff in your, I'm going to jump that really quick. Here is a bit about the slot handling. This is just a slot, but you can see that I also have a slot with a name here. Slot name title. And down here you can see that I have a slot that is named actions, and that actually has content. With this content will act as the default content for this section in the markup. Let's see how this can be used. Here you can see how I'm calling this, and here I have a slot title. This will go into the slot that was named title in the component and replace that with this h3. This here is not marked anything. That will go into the generic slot that I had in my markup and replace that part. Whereas this will go into the slot that was named actions and replace the default content that I had there with this instead. I think I have probably highlighted these as well. Silly that I didn't think about that before, but yeah, so. Yes, man in the shirt there.
What about if you have a handler for the button? Will that go into it? a handler that will be called outside.
Yes.
It will come in there.
Yes.
Thank you.
So here's a more scary way of doing it. This actually works just as well. Oh, I can see he has to squeeze his eyes in order to see it. But this, I call this scary because I think that people that coming from the comfort of a React development environment, they think this is horrible. But this is actually quite a nice way to create content in your component as well. And the perk that you get from doing it this way is that all of these will be available for your code in any place. If you have a function that are dealing with this, they can call label para directly, this label para, as I do, for example, here. I'm creating something up here. I'm setting an attribute to it here, and here I'm adding an event listener to this. And this I can do here, but I can also do it way later in somewhere else in my code. So this gives me access to all of these parts of the markup fairly easily. There are other ways to do that. You can look for it using plain old JavaScript with queries that you, so give me something with that ID, give me something with that class. But this works too, and this gives you it directly.
We have a question here from YouTube.
I'm
Will
on
this
YouTube.
will this HTML be transformed into something else in runtime?
This?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it will be inserted into into the component down here, and will be available as any markup in the DOM. This is JavaScript. This is nothing new. This is not specific for web components. You can do this in any environment. So, yeah.
All right. All right.
Yes. I'm on YouTube. I've never been on YouTube. Whee! So, styling. Well, styling is both easy and hard at the same time. If you want to do it inside the component, it is dead easy. Add your styles, start using them. Here's a key word when it comes to that: contained. It means that the style that you, let me do that one too. The style that you add inside a component will stay in that component and in no way possible to affect any markup that is outside your component. Impossible. Which gives you, for example, the advantage that you don't need to have elaborate class names inside your component. If you only have one div, then you can have a style that calls that div directly without adding a class to that. You don't need to have it my button dash subsection dash underscore dash in order to separate it from all other markup. Do it here and it will stay here. What's put in a web component stays in a web component, at least when it comes to styles. So, very easy. But when you do it from the outside, you have the opposite problem, because the markup is hidden from the context. So you can't say that, oh, I'm adding this bootstrap style sheet to my main index page and think that that will do anything with your component. It won't. It won't see the component, and it won't affect the styles that are inside that component. So, and that can be irritating. There are workarounds, though, several. And, well, let me just show you an example here. Here we're adding or creating an element that we call style, and then we are adding the styles. Here, there's a div. There's only one div, so I don't need to bother about anything else. This will not affect the slot content, by the way. So the slot is part of the external site. So, and then you add it. And as a rule of thumb, add it before you add your content, because that way you will ensure that you don't get flashed of unstyled content when this is introduced into the DOM. So make sure that the styles are in place before you add any markup. Yes. Oh yes. Yeah. 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 Sure. Yes. Most definitely. So I'm actually going to show you another demo here, just to see how you can open up for, and can't write. Bummer, I forgot to start that server. And I should probably double my screen again, like that. I knew that was something I had forgotten. Let's quickly jump back here instead and look at this. I said earlier that I've only written one web component. Not entirely true. As a matter of fact, this entire website is written in web components entirely. There is a component that is called header, and inside that I have components that are called links, and they are repeated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times with different actions attached to them and different markup. This is a routing component, so that when I click on these different tabs here, I get routing. Here we have some experiments that I'm doing with fetching content from the net and then showing details of them. One component here, another one here, all inside a routing component. I have a modal component here, and here's a bit about the styling. This is one modal component that I'm reusing here, but as you can see, they are radically different styled. So you can open up your components for styling from the outside if you want to, but only the parts that you want to do. And I'm not going to show you that failed, because I need to open up that server in order to do that. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and instead check out how you can do that. Here's one way. I am adding variables to my style, and the variables are accessible from the outside. So what I'm doing here is that I'm saying that background color, I'm allowing the background color to be styled from whoever is using my component. If they add a variable that is called primary button background color, then I will use that. If they don't do that, then I will look for a variable that is called primary color, and if they don't do that, then I will use the default value here. Yes, a question. Mike. No, he's not called Mike, but
yeah, I just wanted to ask if that's standard CSS3 to introduce variables in the CSS, or is that a component?
No, no, no. This is part of of what you get. You can do this anywhere. You can do this without using web components. You
Okay,
can have
it's just
variables
standard
in
CSS.
yeah.
All right, thanks.
But as you can see here too, I am not allowing them to style the color, the text color of this button, which is probably stupid, because if I'm allowing them to add a different background, then I should allow them to change the foreground as well, but yeah, I'm not that smart. So, yeah, no time to waste. My conclusion: this is something that's here to stay. They will not go away. I suggest that you take a deep look into how you can use them in your daily workflow soon as possible, because I'm certain that given time, people will not ask for your React capacity or your Angular competence. They will, however, be interested in if you can help them with getting web components up and running. I mean, who here has answered to an ad that asked for your jQuery competence?
My PHP skill, so
PHP is not the same as jQuery. They don't solve the same problem. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but yeah. Yes, I know. And I mean, there is a certain African country that scrapped all web browsers because all their governmental information was developed in Flash. So instead of rewriting them, they published a browser specifically targeted to people living in that country so they could keep using their governmental web services. But that is the odd exception. And today you are not expected to know anything about jQuery. 10 years ago, jQuery was so hot, was so cool. I wrote everything in jQuery and it was hopeless, but I still did it because it was cool. And since then, I moved to AngularJS, I moved to Angular, I moved to Angular 13, I'm using in a project now, and I've used React, and I've used React Native, and React Native is kind of cool, but yeah. I will have to ditch all that, but I will never have to ditch web components, because well, they're native in the browser.
How do you feel about development speed and development environment? React solves a lot of stuff for you as a developer if you have a tight time to market or something like that. So how do you feel about that?
It solves it by allowing developers to be sloppy. I'm sorry to say that, but the project that I couldn't show you because I've forgotten to start the web server. I took over a project built in Angular that in distribution was 6 megabytes large. I rewrote it using only web components, using no external libraries. The only thing that I'm calling from the outside is Google Analytics, because I'm forced to do that by the client. The full distribution of that project, including images, is 700 kilobytes. If I remove the images, I'm down to 90K of JavaScript and HTML markup. This makes a difference for the users, most definitely. This computer down here that I forgot to start, that's a Pi 3, Raspberry Pi 3. It is running a web server, and it's giving me, it was supposed to give me a countdown, but I forgot to start it. But it is also written completely using web components, which means that I need very little power to do it. I can have a computer that is 5 years old and wasn't that great even when released. If we're talking about speed, small, yeah, but not fast. And it works. I don't think I could put an Angular project there and have it display on my screen. It would balk on me. It would say something nasty that I don't want to repeat. And also the compatibility.
One more question from YouTube.
Okay.
If you're prepared.
I am so prepared.
Is it possible to see how web components is set up on a clean computer? Is it as simple as just add a JavaScript library, or does it require more complex tools?
It doesn't require any tools at all. You can distribute web components without using a build system. You don't need Babel, you don't need Webpack, none of that. You can send it out as is. You can also use a build system if you want to. I have used Rollup, for example, to package a number of web components into one single JavaScript file. That was also very easy to distribute. But again, when I did that, I compared it to when we send out our Angular projects to Azure, it takes 10 to 15 minutes to build each time we want to distribute them. Yeah, 10 to 15 minutes. When I do the same with the web component, it takes 1 minute or less than a minute, but it's blistering fast to get it out and running. This is also time for developers and for those who pay the developers that you should take into consideration. So it's much easier to get a web component out and running.
How much more time it takes to develop web component than rather if you have been using React?
Well, for one thing, when I started to use React, I first had to learn React, right? And when I started to use Angular, I had to learn Angular, and then I had to relearn Angular because they redid everything for me. And Angular is really, really hard to learn, at least for me, because I don't have a brain. It did not take nearly as long to learn web components. And in fact, I noticed that stuff that I thought was invented by React or Angular turned out to be native JavaScript. So, wow, this is not specific for that library. This is something that's been there all along. I just didn't know about it. It kind of depends. I mean, I have written my own routing. I've written my own state handler. I've set an honor in not importing anything from anywhere, doing it myself because I wanted to learn about it. But I mean, I could also do it the React way and go fetch stuff. And there are an abundance of resources for web components, and they are growing. So you don't have to invent the wheel if you don't want to. You can do as you do in React, import them, and start using them.
Yeah, how do you feel about using TypeScript with web components?
If you use a library, you can use TypeScript. A lit element, for example, you can use TypeScript. I'm no fan of TypeScript, but I mean, I use it in my Angular daily work. But TypeScript, that's people get educated at universities and they learn real languages. And then when they come to JavaScript, they, wow, this is too free. There are no restrictions. It has to be, I have to be able to trust that this variable stays a number and not suddenly turns into a string. But that's just discipline. And TypeScript is not a superscript for JavaScript. It is a subscript. It takes part of what you can do in JavaScript and implements it. Sorry, give him a mic so I can hear what he's saying.
Okay, here comes a very strong opinion. It's a useless overhead for sloppy developers. That's what TypeScript is about.
Yeah. So but I mean, if you love TypeScript, then that's not a hindrance. You can continue to use it.
It's only useful for, it's for the development part because TypeScript catches a lot. Anyway, I have a comment. It's more this reminds me a lot about Vue. This made Vue obsolete. Like not React, not Angular, but there's no point in using Vue because it's pretty much exactly the same thing, except minus the Vue overhead. So learn Vue or this, it's the same shit. That's basically my takeaway from this because it's exactly the same template system. Same template system. And it even has like the custom of putting in a dash between in the component names, the same slot things. So yeah, this is good, but like React and Angular has other things that are kind of useful, and I think they'll go away in a long time. But this is good stuff.
What stuff do they have? Just so.
It's honestly just mostly tooling, and like JSX is so nice. You showed that part where you write the individual bits. You can do that in React if you don't use JSX, but JSX is just so nice, like to use. But yeah, in general, it's also like laziness. React works so let's stick with it.
You can write your HTML outside of the component in the HTML file itself. You surround it with a template. You say this is a template, and you give that template an ID, and then you call that in your component, which gives you sort of all the benefits that you get from an IDE when it comes to coloring and syntax checks and all of that. So I don't see it as a drawback.
No, it's not necessarily a drawback, but like once you're used to something and it's also the tooling set up and it's all
Sure.
That's mostly inertia. This stuff is pretty nice, and if anyone's into Vue, this is just basically like a drop-in replacement.
Yes. To my friend in the corner.
It's just a comment, but all the tooling, it's probably true that the tooling is worse for web components than React and Angular, but all of the tooling could be built. And you could write any kind of JSX to whatever converter, and people will probably do that within the next years. And yeah.
I have a question about state and or data into the component.
Mm.
If you use it for instance, in a React environment, could you add a object there with data, and you can use it within the component?
No and yes. A component accepts attributes, and those attributes has to be text. They cannot be objects of any kind, and they can't even be numbers. They have to be text, and then you convert them. But you can get them into the component by other means. So there are ways to get the component to listen to. And for example, Angular does that for you. That's one of the conveniences of using a web component in Angular. You can send in objects into the component in the exact same way as you would with an Angular component.
And how do you handle them in the component as a string then? And you
No,
do whatever?
no, that's no, you don't need to do that. Yeah.
So you get them as JavaScript object in the component?
Yeah.
Okay. So what about if I have some state outside in my React application, and that state will change? How will it react in the component?
No pizzas, yes? Oh, sorry. That means that I was so tempted to bring up that, because I am using state in the project that I'm not showing you, and that state communicates super easy between all the different components that I'm using. So that's, and it's a persistent state in my case. It uses local storage, so that if I should want to come back, I will have access to the state that I left it in.
Finally, if I have a state in the component of some sort, what happens if the outside environment, say React, changes and React will re-render your component? What happens with your stuff, with your state?
Well, it honors the state. It honors the state. It will take the state into consideration in the re-rendering.
Okay.
So, mic up there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
What's your advice?
No, Mike.
What's your advice for the guys who want to start with learning web component from zero? Like for me, I like you and I hate you in the same time because you was following us for like...
Are we married? Because I've heard that before.
I was learning React for years now in school, and now I just start mainly writing class and using web component, and I want to like learn it as good as possible again. So what you can advise me to learn the web component? How one way, like YouTube, or there's some special courses or something?
Well, I've used something called Google for most of my knowledge collection, and it worked fairly well. I have a number of different URLs that we can look at once we've had some pizza, and I know that's coming up. But there are a growing number of resources where you can learn. And as I see, one of the advantages with web components is that you don't have to take the whole bite. You can start by experimenting, doing one component and see how you integrate that into your React project, and then eventually perhaps skip the React part altogether. But and with the perk there that web component that you have, if you come to a new client and they say, yeah, but we do everything in Angular, you can use the same web component
Yeah.
directly into that project as well. So, I'm not sure about that. I wrote an autocomplete thing that I did for my the project that I'm not showing you.
We want the GitHub URL of that project.
Wrap up, yeah.
One thing to you, I wouldn't be so eager to drop React. If you want a good salary, it's gonna stay for years. But web components, MDN, the Mozilla Development Network, they have a lot of great resources in that website. I would like Google, MDN space whatever you need to search, and you get good results.
You asked what this has that React has and this doesn't. Well, as you said, state handling is a very, like, I wouldn't have to write my own state handling. It will not
But
update.
I'll have you notice that Redux, that most people use for state handling, is not a React thing.
No, it's not. But
you
I
can
mean,
use that in a web component.
yeah, but that's Redux. But yeah,
Yeah.
React takes care of a lot of the whole updating and
Yeah.
re-rendering for me. So I don't have to do it myself. But yeah, this is cool stuff.
All right.
I'm done.
Well, thank you, Jolle.
Thank you.
And now for some pizza, right?
And you can
All
come back
right.
with them.
Are you ready for some questions, Jolle?
Mhm.
So, you can use Polymer and Light HTML for a better experience with templates, says Robert Sundqvist.
Yes. Was that a question?
No, I think it was just a comment, to be
Yeah,
honest,
yeah.
but that's what he said. And we have...
There are perks and there are disadvantages with using light HTML. One of them being that it's not contained within your component and you don't have the same control over it.
yeah.
So
All right, here's another one. As the name implies, web components only solve the component side of things. They won't offer route services, HTTP, client, directive, etc. Does a combo framework plus web components need to be optimal then?
Well, first of all, I have state handling in web components, and I know that works. So that's not an
Yeah,
issue.
it's basically just a JavaScript class, so it should work.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to HTTP, I favor fetch because fetch is a really nice way of getting stuff from the web and interacting with whatever backend you have. So you don't need to import any external support for that because again, that is built into the web server itself.
Yeah, and if you use fetch, for instance, you have great polyfills for that.
Yeah.
So you can just use that without compromising your bundle size.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I have one question about the diversity of techniques that are constantly being developed. The problem is that I see it's not too hard. I did that wrong. The problem that I see, it is hard to learn the most of them in order to get a job? Okay, so there's more. You become a jack of all trades and master of none. I'm sure web components are awesome and it can save a lot of time, but will it be listed as one of the requirements among many requirements by
That's-
company?
yeah.
I don't know how to deal with this. Could you give some advice?
Well, my advice would be that web components will emerge as something that every company will require when they discover the benefits that they get from them. Comes to distribution size, distribution simplicity, and for once it's a new technique, or sort of new, that simplifies things instead of making them more complicated, and that
Simplify it for the browser.
simplifies for the development process. I've been to workplaces where it took in average about 10 days before a new developer was productive, because there were so many things that they needed to have in place first. You need complicated IDEs, you need tooling stuff, you need the lot.
Yeah, and
Web
here
components takes away a lot of that. Not all of it, depending on circumstances, but a lot of it. And companies would want that. And also, they want to be able to say that, oh, our website is accessible even if you have a lousy internet connection in the middle of the forest with low bandwidth. Our site, our service is so small in distribution that that doesn't matter so much.
Yep, you can't see a single JavaScript developer who doesn't need to worry about bundle sizes. It's always a thing.
But they don't.
No, they don't.
They should, but they don't. So, yeah.
Sorry, one quick question is, how do you see web components fitting into the whole portable web application kind of browser native application development? Because that's something that for me is definitely on my mind. So yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't have a straight answer because I haven't tried it. I've built stuff in React Native, and React Native is JavaScript, so it should be possible to use web components there, but I haven't tried it. So web components is, first of all, it is a JavaScript implementation, and secondly, it does assume that you have a browser to work in. I mean, it's, for example, as far as I know, it's not a server-side technique. It can't be used for pre-rendering and things like that. Then again, I think that pre-rendering becomes more uninteresting because the download time for the JavaScript is so small and fast, and it is way easier for a browser, even on a lousy phone, to render it because it can ask the browser directly. It doesn't need to go around a framework and say, okay, I want to do this. What do you want? I'm going to ask Angular to help me do it. And then Angular talks to the browser. That just takes processing cycles. Okay, can I have a pizza? And did anyone take any photos? Bummer.
Wave to the audience.
Hey.